Boners, what's good? Last week in the FFSR, I opened up talking about fantasy nirvana, where the points were going up and up and up every single week. Hopefully that trend has continued for a lot of you out there. Chris Pearson here again with you. For me this week, not exactly the same stuff, mostly because thankfully for me, it wasn't injuries, which happened, I'm sure, to a lot of your teams this week. But for me, touchdown guys just didn't come through this week. So a lot to get to in this. This is the Week 7 recap and Week 8 preview edition of the FFSR. Always trying to be your home, your place to go for the latest fantasy information. Again, I just want to say thank you guys to all these subscribers, to viewers, for your guys' feedback and everything, and I appreciate that. And again, you guys can feel free to remember to leave any comments or questions you may have. I'll answer as many as I can. And so a lot to dissect, a lot to get into. A lot happened last week in Week 7. The big thing again, though, was the injuries. A lot of either season-ending injuries or injuries that are going to affect players in the long term. They're going to have to get guys on waivers now. The waiver wire was a busy place, I'm sure, this week. It certainly was in my league. I missed out on a couple of guys. I got beat by a couple of guys that I thought I really, really wanted. But that's kind of the downside. Here's the thing with waivers, and here's kind of like how should I put this? The kind of the bad thing, the negative of having a really good team and a really good record is that you never get first crack at waivers unless you're competing against people in your league that are really dumb, don't know the game very well, first-time players. Usually, then, if you're playing against people like that, you're going to get guys off waivers for whoever it is every time. But that's not the case in my league. My league apparently has very smart owners in it who do their homework because they tend to get the guys off waivers that I also want, and they beat me to it. So, but hopefully for you, if you've been doing your homework or if you're looking for this place to get your homework and have not put in your waiver claims yet, hopefully we can fill you in on some guys this week that can really help your teams this week to be successful. So let's just jump right in to quarterbacks. Again, you know how we do it here at the FFSR now. We're doing it position by position, breaking it down at the big major positions, especially quarterback, running back, wideout, and tight end for sure. And then we might mention some plug and play kickers and defenses at the end with some good matchups this week, especially for those of you who stream defenses each week, like I have been able to do this year by picking up a D each week after week after week with a really good matchup. So, starting with quarterbacks, the top quarterback from last week, unfortunately for many of you, you're not going to have him this week. Now, this week and next week, the couple weeks going forward, really starts a trend where we see a lot of teams going on the bye weeks. So this is really a critical week for waivers, not only because of the injuries, but because of the fact that there are so many teams on bye this week. There's 6, count them, 6, like this, 6. If I can turn my wrist right, there you go. 6 teams on bye this week. Most of the AFC South, which is Indianapolis, Houston, Tennessee, although Jacksonville plays like they're on bye every single week, and also Chicago. Okay, now I just forgot it. Chicago, Baltimore, and I mentioned Houston. Now I'm missing one. I always forget one. Okay, the whole AFC, most of the AFC South. Baltimore, Chicago. Who was that other team? See, now it's going to kill me. Now I got to look it up. Because I had these in my head, and now it's like, it's gone. San Diego. That's right. And I should have known that. I should have known San Diego because I have Chargers on my team. Duh. Baseball moment. Okay. Showing signs of aging. But, anywho. So Baltimore, Chicago, San Diego, and 3 of the 4 of the AFC South, not including Jacksonville, are on bye this week. So we're going to have to find a lot of guys that are going to step up and maybe fill these roles, whether it's for 1 week or whether for the long term. So Andrew Luck was the top quarterback this past week, but you're not going to have Andrew Luck this week because he's on the bye. But he put up a great performance against Denver this past week, leading the Colts to the win, which obviously surprised a lot of people because Denver was expected it was expected to be a good game by a lot of people, but I think a lot of people didn't give the Colts much of a chance to win, although the upside was they were playing that at home, so the home crowd really was big there. But Luck went 21 of 38 for 228 yards with 3 scores. He also had a rushing touchdown this week, so which he tends to really do very frequently, very often. So 35 fantasy points for Luck this week. Now, again, you're not going to have him this week because of the bye week. But Luck's fantasy value also takes a little bit of a hit because here's the first big injury I'm going to mention, Reggie Wayne. Reggie Wayne is out for the year with a torn ACL. It was a very unfortunate injury. He wasn't tackled or touched on the play. But Luck, what I love about Andrew Luck is that he is so humble. He's very grounded. He doesn't really like to heap praise on himself. It says it's all about team. But here's what surprised me. When they interviewed about the Reggie Wayne injury, he said, it was totally my fault. I shouldn't have thrown the ball that low to him. And he took complete responsibility for that. Good Andrew Luck. That, you don't like to be responsible for your players' injuries, and injuries are part of the game and they happen, but when you can take the blame for it, I think that only makes you look like, the stronger man, the stronger person. So, but again, you're not going to have Luck this week because he's on bye, so keep him reserved, but certainly Andrew Luck is at least a borderline number 1 moving forward. With all the quarterbacks that are suffering injuries and the matchups and all this, Luck is certainly a guy you can have on a weekly basis, but of course not this week because it's not a bye. A guy that has been red hot lately, and I'm looking back, I'm glad that I have kept this guy as my number 2 quarterback, and I mentioned him last week as well as Andy Dalton. Another hot week for Andy Dalton this past week, going up against Detroit, whose, again, defense has really not been overly impressive this year. Dalton completely carved them up, 24 of 34 for 372 with 3 touchdowns, 32 fantasy points in a CBS league. He's now had over 30 points the last 2 weeks, and certainly is a guy that you can plug in as a bye week filler this week. Again, you don't have guys like Luck. You don't have Joe Flacco. You don't have Jake Locker this week. You don't have whoever starting in Chicago, although because Jay Cutler's hurt, we'll talk about that as well. But all these guys, Dalton is certainly a serviceable bye week fill-in option, playing like a strong number 2 right now. Now this week's matchup, I'm a little bit leery about because obviously the Jets, strong on defense. They've looked good in recent weeks. They're starting to get hot because they beat the Patriots last week. So a little bit tougher matchup. So you might not expect a 30-point week from Dalton this week. But again, if your quarterback is on a bye this week and if Dalton's somehow out there or you've held on to Dalton and you haven't put him in yet, I think now could be a really good week as a number 2 quarterback or a guy you can plug and play. I'm really impressed with what I've been seeing from Andy Dalton. And the nice thing about Andy Dalton is his bye week isn't until week 12, toward when the bye weeks end. So you can keep plugging and playing Andy Dalton till the cows come home. So really like Andy Dalton. Great play by him the past couple of weeks. But in that same game, Matthew Stafford had a really good game. He also had 32 fantasy points, 28 of 51 for 357 and 3 scores. So very similar stat line to Dalton. And again, when you have a receiver like Calvin Johnson that can make sick catches like he did, and if you have not, again, a clip I recommend, if you have not seen that sick touchdown catch where he goes over 3 defenders and makes the catch, it's absolutely ridiculous. So, I mean, if you have a receiver like that, you're going to have, good stats every week. So, Matthew Stafford, really like him this week. Dallas's defense has been nothing stellar really this year, although they were able to shut down Philly last week. But Philly's offense right now, mostly kind of a mess. Nick Foles now is banged up, so I'm not sure if I'm sold on that. I think you can keep rolling with Matthew Stafford, obviously, as a must-start guy. Obviously, you're starting Peyton Manning against Washington's soft defense. Peyton Manning doesn't care about matchup. He's starting every single week, but he had 31 fantasy points last week. He did throw his first pick, so that was a little bit of a rough thing. But going up against Washington, great matchup. You're rolling with him. You're definitely rolling with Aaron Rodgers against Minnesota this week. The Vikings are atrociously bad. I mean, they're not as bad as Jacksonville. They're not as bad as Jacksonville. They might not be as bad as Tampa Bay. Okay, maybe a little bit worse than Tampa Bay. The winless Giants just beat them in prime time. And even Mike Tirico, and I posted the comment on my Facebook status, even Mike Tirico said, this has been a terrible quarter of football. These two teams are just bad. And he said bad. He put emphasis on the word bad. I mean, the Vikings are just bad. When the Vikings are talking about trading their only top player in Adrian Peterson, that's desperation, okay? That's equivalent to what the Cleveland Browns did trading Trent Richardson. That they are almost giving up on the season. They're trying to start fresh. They're trying to start new because right now that team is a grease fire. So Aaron Rodgers, you're starting against Minnesota. You're starting your Packers. You're starting him. You're starting Eddie Lacy, Jarrett Boykin, all these guys. You're starting them against that Minnesota defense because the Vikings are just awfully sad. RG3 had another good week this week, 29 fantasy points. Going up against Denver, if Andrew Luck can just carve up Denver, imagine what RG3 is going to do. So keep rolling with RG3. Matt Ryan, apparently no issues with Matt Ryan. Everyone was freaking out about Matty Ice. Everyone was saying, oh, he's done have Julio Jones. Oh, no, he's not a top option anymore. Oh, no, he's got Harry Douglas and David Cohn and all these guys, or Drew Cohn, whatever the Cohn guy's name is. And all these unknown guys, what are we going to do? Do we drop him? Do we bench him? I started him last week. He was fine. 28 fantasy points, people. Matt Ryan is still a strong QB1. He's still okay. He can make do with less than probably any other quarterback I've seen out there. I mean, he just is able to find a way. He was 20 of 26 for 273 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a quarterback rating of 148.4, people. That was the highest of any quarterback this week. I'm telling you, don't panic over Matt Ryan. He's going to be fine. He's got a great matchup going up against Arizona this week. Keep rolling with Matt Ryan. Russell Wilson this week, outstanding matchup this week going up against a terrible Rams defense that is just, again, kind of like Washington or Jacksonville's defense has been butter this season. They haven't been able to stop anything. Wilson was 18 to 29 last week for 235 yards and 3 touchdowns. And oh, by the way, if Russell Wilson gets Percy Harvin back this week, which a lot of people are saying that potentially he could be, it makes him in Seattle that much more dangerous. So Russell Wilson, you're definitely starting your Seahawks against the Rams. And if Percy Harvin is active and plays, you're definitely starting him against the Rams as well. I mentioned Jake Locker. He's back. I'm surprised that he came back this early. I thought that hip injury would keep him out at least for a very extended period of time, but apparently he rehabbed very quickly and was able to play through. And look, he has clearly established himself as the top quarterback option in Tennessee. There's no doubt. Ryan Fitzpatrick was clearly not the answer in Tennessee with Locker out, and Locker makes his receivers better when he is in the game. Guys like Kendall Wright, guys like Nate Washington. You wish that Kenny Britt would come around, but he's just a grease fire as well. So, but Locker makes some of these guys better. Delaney Walker's starting to come around. So Locker had a pretty good week, 25 of 41, 326, 2 scores at the pick. Obviously, you're going to keep him reserved this week if you have Locker as your number 2 guy because he's on a bye week. But certainly, again, in future weeks with him back, and as long as he's healthy, he's a guy you can have as your number 2 option for you moving forward. Same with Geno Smith of the Jets. Geno is starting to get more and more confidence every week, starting to look stronger, develop a nice rapport with his receivers. He had 22 fantasy points last week, and hey, when you beat the Patriots, you're going to get confidence. So great week for Geno. I don't love the matchup this week for him, though, going up against Cincinnati. That's a really tough Bengals defense. They're going to try to find a way to shut him down, but also, that Jets defense is going to try to shut down Andy Dalton. This is a battle of 2 really good defenses. I expect a real kind of sloppy, low-scoring game, so I would temper myself on Geno Smith. I would also temper things on Mike Glennon. of Tampa Bay. If you want to use him maybe as a plug-and-play, you can if you're desperate, but I don't love the matchup going up on tomorrow night against Carolina. The Panthers' defense has been outstanding this year. They had 20 fantasy points last week. I lost to the guy who had the Panthers D last week, and I tell you what, the guy I lost to, even though he was 1-5 coming into the game, and I was 5-1. He doesn't have a 1-5 team. He didn't play like a 1-5 team because he's got talent up and down his roster. He had Vincent Jackson, for gosh sake. He had the Panthers D. He had Alfred Morris. He had Zach Stacy. He had these guys that are really starting to do well. So I gave him a lot of credit in my post-game comments I put in on the site because he deserved all that credit for beating my team last week because of these guys that really step up and play well. But the Panthers defense is going to find a way to really shut Mike Glennon down. They're probably going to be focused in on Vincent Jackson because Vincent Jackson, like I said, is now their only offensive threat because Doug Martin is out with that shoulder injury, that torn labrum in his shoulder. They're not saying it's a long-term injury, but a lot of people rushed to the waiver wire this week to get Mike James. I was one of those people that wanted Mike James, but I got beat out on him because my league is smart. So not sold on Mike Glennon this week. After that, now obviously other guys on this list, Colin Kaepernick, you're obviously starting your 49ers this week against the Jaguars. That's a given. The 49ers are going to have a great week this week with Kaepernick, Frank Gore, Vernon Davis, Anquan Bolden. These guys are going to be awesome this week for you. A guy to target going forward, at least for the next couple weeks, is Josh McCown of Chicago. Another injury, Jay Cutler. Tore a groin muscle. He's expected to miss at least 4 weeks from what I've heard. So McCown is going to step in and be the guy in Chicago. He filled in pretty nicely in Cutler's absence, 14-20, 204 yards and a touchdown. Also rushed 4 times for 33 yards. So not a bad week, 17 fantasy points. McCown is probably out there in a lot of your leagues. So if you need a number 2 quarterback or a bye week fill-in moving forward, maybe McCown's your guy. Obviously, they have a bye this week, so you're not getting McCown this week. But in Week 9, the Bears play Green Bay on Monday night. So that will probably be a shootout. So, again, maybe a plug-and-play guy for you. You won't have Phillip Rivers this week again, so keep him reserved. Love Cam Newton this week going up against Tampa. I mean, yeah, Tampa is a tough defense, but I tell you what, Cam Newton and the Panthers have really been an under-the-radar sleeper team this year, at least to me. I've been quite impressed by some of the Panthers' games this year, and Cam, he's always getting double-digit points. So I love Cam's matchup this week. I would definitely go with Cam as a sneaky, borderline 1-2 option or a good bye week fill-in option for you. Alex Smith of Kansas City, love him against Cleveland this week, especially as a number 2 or bye week fill-in for you. Love Alex Smith. You can definitely roll with him. Eli Manning going up against Philly. Decent matchup. Again, I only look at Eli again. Now we're kind of getting into the number 2 guys here as we go down the list now at this point. Philly's defense, not stellar by any stretch, but they're banged up on offense. So maybe you can use Eli again as number 2 or a plug and play. Same with Roethlisberger against Oakland. Tony Romo against Detroit. Now, I really like Tony Romo against Detroit because, again, Detroit just got destroyed by Andy Dalton. So I think you can definitely roll with Tony Romo this week. I think he'll put up big numbers. Sam Bradford of St. Louis is done for the year, tore his ACL. So you can safely drop him in the majority of leagues. We don't know who St. Louis's quarterback is going to be. They're trying out guys off the street. They apparently do not have faith in Kellen Clemens to be that guy, so clearly their situation's a mess. Carson Palmer, don't like him really against Atlanta. I don't like Brandon Weeden. They're not touching these guys. Chad Henne, Thad Lewis. Now Tom Brady, we got to talk about Tom Brady because a lot of people are becoming very, very frustrated with Tom Brady and how he's not been producing very well the last few weeks. Obviously, unless you have a quarterback that has a really, really good matchup as a number 2, that you can put in over Tom Brady, you're probably not sitting Tom Brady. But if you've reached a point where it's just become so frustrating, or maybe you're a playoff team, or you're close to the playoffs, you're trying to make that playoff push, and you've just become so frustrated with Tom Brady that you don't think he's going to bounce back, Now, he has gotten Rob Gronkowski back. He'll get Shane Vereen back in Week 11. But you wonder if that'll be enough to save his fantasy relevance. He only had 7 fantasy points last week. 22 of 46 for 228 and only the 1 score. So, really, and going up against Miami this week, Miami's defense, they just got beat by Buffalo last week. So, I think Brady should bounce back in a big way. But, if you've reached a point where you think you have a quarterback with a better matchup, if you want to roll the dice, go for it. But just remember that this is Tom Brady we're talking about, and he could go off at any point. You don't want to be the guy in the week that sat Tom Brady and said, oh, great, he put up 20, 30-plus points on my bench. So just keep that in mind. Josh Freeman in Minnesota, again, Minnesota's quarterback situation, I wouldn't touch it. Besides, Freeman now has concussion-like symptoms, so they're not expecting him to start anyway. They're going to go back to Christian, scary, I don't know what I nicknamed him, Christian something Ponder, I blame God-awful Gabbard and Miles frickin' Austin and Christian pathetic Ponder. I don't know, because really, any Minnesota quarterback this year has really been bad, so I wouldn't touch that. And Nick Foles got hurt this week for Philly. They're going to go back to Michael Vick, so I don't know. So just a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position, let's just say, but still some really good options for you this week. Okay, moving on now to running backs. Top running back this week is, again, a guy you're not going to be, unfortunately, not going to be able to have this week for this week because it's the bye week. But Matt Forte of Chicago. I told you guys to start your Bears against the Redskins' butter defense, and boy, oh boy, they put up some really good numbers, and Keller would put up, I'm sure, some good numbers had he not gotten hurt, but McCown filled in nicely in his place. But I tell you what, Forte, Forte is rock solid every single week, usually regardless of matchup. He's going to do good things for you. 16 carries for 91 yards, 3 touchdowns, 28 fantasy points. I mean, Matt Forte, you can ride this guy as your top running back. But again, we're not going to have him this week because of the bye week, so keep that in mind. Keep him reserved this week. I mentioned the Niners. Frank Gore had another big week last week with 22 fantasy points, 24 carries, 70 yards, and 2 scores. You're going to keep rolling with him this week, obviously, because the Niners are going to carve up Jacksonville. An interesting name, actually a couple interesting names out there that put up the 3rd and 4th most fantasy points last week. Roy Halou from Washington and Jacquizz Rodgers from Atlanta. Now, going forward, I think Halou's upside is a little bit better because, yes, he's still behind Alfred Morris. But here's the thing about Halou. He is used as the goal line back, and he had 3 touchdowns this week. He also kind of used in those passing situations. So, I've talked about these guys that I really like, these flex players that can be number 2 running backs that, like Woodhead, Sproles. Rodgers certainly fits that mold. Halou fits that mold. So Joyke Bell fits that mold. So I've talked about these guys and how much I really like these guys. And Halou, usually with Mike Shanahan, we thought for sure that Alfred Morris, he really likes Alfred Morris and he's the guy. But now that he's getting Halou involved, it's kind of frustrating for Alfred Morris owners. But Halou, you can't ignore 11 carries on 41 yards with the 3 scores last week for 22 points. If you're looking at a flex option or if you're looking for a number 2 running back you can put in and play this week, I think you could do worse than Halou. Again, going up against Denver this week, as long as, the Colts didn't do much running against Denver because they don't have much of a running offense. But on the passing plays, if they get close and Halou's right there, then he could be the guy. So I really like Halou a little bit going forward. Maybe a plug-and-play number 2 or more of a number 3 flex option, though. But I like his upside better than Jacquizz Rodgers because here's the thing about Jacquizz Rodgers. His fantasy relevancy depends on how long Steven Jackson is out. Now, there's been a lot of talk that Steven Jackson could come back as soon as this week. He's also saying, I'm going to play this week. He's saying he thinks he's ready to go. But other people say it's the hamstring's responding very well yet. So it's really kind of an up-in-the-air situation. He might end up, being a game-time decision. So if you have Jacquizz Rodgers like I do, I'm hoping Rodgers can be my number 2 running back this week. Otherwise, if Steven Jackson's active and Rodgers is worthless, I'll have to go scrambling on the wire and find a last-minute replacement because I don't have Danny Woodhead this week. So Jaguars Rodgers for last week he only had 8 carries for 16 yards. But the thing about Rodgers is he does most of his damage out of the passing game. Caught 8 of his 9 targets for 46 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's how he got his points. So again, monitor the Steven Jackson situation. See what happens with him. With see how much he practices with that hamstring issue. And if he is out, I think Jaguars Rodgers obviously still has a lot of fantasy value. Again, I love the matchup with Arizona this week. Rodgers certainly could be a serviceable number 2 or a flex as long as Jackson is out. 2 guys, again, that had good weeks are not going to have this week. Of course, that's Ryan Matthews and Chris Johnson. They're both on their bye weeks this week. It was nice to see Chris Johnson have a good week, especially against San Francisco. But again, he did a lot of his damage on the passing downs as well. He caught all 4 targets for 71 yards with a touchdown. He only rushed 9 times for 39 yards. So again, the rushing is a concern. But hey, if they're getting CJ involved in the passing game now in Tennessee, good for them. That keeps his fantasy relevant. And Ryan Matthews, again, with him and Danny Woodhead, it's definitely a timeshare. Matthews is the ground and pound guy, while Woodhead is the passing down back and the goal line back out of the backfield. But Matthews is putting up solid numbers. 21 carries, 110 yards with a score last week. So definitely Matthews is still serviceable. Chris Johnson is still serviceable, but you won't have him this week because they're bye weeks. Eddie Lacy of Green Bay, obviously like I said, you're rolling with your Packers this week against Minnesota. Eddie Lacy's back. He's clearly the guy to own in Green Bay's backfield. 22 carries, 82 yards with a score. Keep rolling with him against Minnesota this week. Marshawn Lynch is a dream matchup this week. I don't know how it gets better for Marshawn Lynch going up against that Rams defense. He had 15 points last week. Now, there was kind of the controversial thing with Marshawn Lynch, and I watched the Thursday night game against Arizona, and I thought he had the 1 touchdown near the goal line, but they ruled him down at the 1, and then they called the play on 3rd and goal. And apparently it's not going to Lynch, and then Lynch kind of gives a different kind of bird to the Seahawks bench. But what are you going to do? If obviously in that situation you think Lynch would get the ball again and he'd run it in, but they thought the screen pass would work. It worked, and what more can you do? And of course I also screened at my television, and when they showed it, I said, "Yeah, I'm with you, Marshawn. I think you should have given you the ball too." But that's how much we love fantasy. We want our players to score and not someone else's. But you're definitely rolling with Marshawn Lynch this week. Keep rolling with Jamal Charles this week, going up against Cleveland. Great matchup for Jamal Charles. He's been strong all year. 21 carries for 86 yards and a score last week. He also lost. He did lose a fumble, but still had 15 fantasy points. Now, Zach Stacy of the Rams, obviously he has cemented himself as the Rams' top running back. But here's the thing now about Zach Stacy that's really interesting. With the fact now that Sam Bradford's out with that torn ACL, with the fact that they don't know who the quarterback's going to be and that the receiver's value takes a big-time hit, I think Zach Stacy is going to be expected to do a lot more work for the Rams' offense this season. Now, granted, the matchup with Seattle this week is very tough. So obviously I can only rate Stacy as more of a number 2, number 3 back. But certainly, if you either own Stacy or if you've put him on your bench and stashed him to see whether a good matchup would occur now, he's going to have to carry this offense now because with the uncertainty of all this with the quarterbacks and receivers, someone's going to have to step up. So Stacy, I really like him moving forward. Maybe not so much this week because the matchup, but maybe someone you can really expect great things from moving forward. The Bills running backs this week, Fred Jackson. If you had to own one Buffalo running back, I think I would rather have Fred Jackson than C.J. Spiller just because Jackson has been, I think, more involved with, the flex play. I see both as flex options. They both get involved, I think, in the passing game. But again, tough matchup this week going up against that Saints defense, coming off a bye, having a week to prepare for Thad Lewis at quarterback. I think, just temper expectations on those guys. I'm not fully sold on them this week. Interesting guy again, to look at going forward as maybe a number 2, number 3 running back moving forward is Peyton Hillis of the Giants. This was a guy that, for me, a couple years ago, I grabbed Peyton Hillis off waivers when he was in Cleveland, and he broke out for a monster year, and I was able to use him as my number 2 running back for the rest of the season. Peyton Hillis is found his way back into football, and he had a pretty decent week. He had 18 carries, 36 yards and a touchdown, but also had 5 catches on 6 targets for 45 yards for a 13-point week. So not bad for a guy who wasn't even on an NFL roster a few weeks ago. So Peyton Hillis is definitely, if he's out there in your league, he's worth a grab and stash, at least moving forward, or even a guy, again, you can plug in as your number 2 this week if you don't have Danny Woodhead, if you don't have Foster or Ben Tate or, even Trent Richardson or Donald Brown. He's a guy who can put in, and again, going up against the Eagles, not exactly a stellar defense. So I really like Peyton Hillis going forward as long as he is the starter. Obviously, there's a situation with David Wilson. How's his health? Andre Brown's health. Is Michael Cox going to get more involved? There's still a lot of uncertainty there, but certainly right now it looks like the Giants really trust Peyton Hillis to be the guy. Another guy that's going to be the guy, it looks like, at least until Shane Vereen comes back, Stevan Ridley. Keep rolling with him against Miami this week. Chris Ivory of the Jets. Welcome back to fantasy relevance. He has apparently regained his starting job. Now, the Jets have said that they want to go with the guy who has the hot hand. Well, clearly right now it's not Bilal Powell, who we thought had the hot hand 2 weeks ago, and he was going off for buku yardage. And I said on here, hey, pick him up. But now he's back to being the second fiddle to Chris Ivory, because now that Chris Ivory's healthy again, the hamstring no longer an issue. Ivory got 34 carries last week. 34 carries. That was more than any back last week on 104 yards. He did not find the end zone, unfortunately, but 10 fantasy points, that's usually number 2, borderline number 1, number 2 running back stats. So, again, if he's out there in your league, now, again, the matchup with Cincinnati, not great this week, but, again, he's the starter, it looks like. So you can't go wrong with that. I think Chris Ivory's a guy who can plug in as a number 2 for you. You're definitely starting Noshawn Moreno this week against Washington. He had 10 fantasy points last week. Again, keep rolling with Alfred Morris, 9 points. Even though Halu is, again, getting that work, Alfred Morris, I think, still going to get the bulk of the rushing yardage. He had 19 carries on 95 yards, so he's still going to get the bulk of the ground and pound work. Le'Veon Bell of Pittsburgh had a 9-point week last week, 19 carries on 93 yards. I love the matchup with him this week going up against Oakland. I think you could still roll with Le'Veon Bell as a number 2 running back. Mike Tolbert of Carolina is an interesting one that I've discussed on here. He's had touchdowns the past couple weeks, but here's the thing about Mike Tolbert. He only gets work at the goal line. He's not the starting back like D'Angelo Williams. In fact, he's third on the depth chart behind him and Jonathan Stewart, even though Jonathan Stewart is out right now with the ankle issue. Once Jonathan Stewart comes back, Tolbert will be back to the third string. But you can't ignore the fact that he's put up touchdowns the last few weeks, 13 carries on 36 yards with a score. I think, and again, a tough matchup, though, with Tampa Bay this week. So maybe Tolbert is more of a number 3 or a flex play this week, but you can't ignore the fact that he's been red hot of late. So just keep that in mind. Reggie Bush of Detroit, obviously you want to keep rolling with him. 9 fantasy points last week. He gets work now out of the backfield more than Joyke Bell, in my opinion. So you want to keep rolling with him. Let's see. Joseph Randle of Dallas. Like him moving forward, again, as long as DeMarco Murray is out, you want to keep rolling with Joseph Randle. He had 19 carries on 65 yards last week, plus 3 catches for 28 yards. That's 8 points, but again, that's a solid number 2 back, so you want to keep rolling with him going up against Detroit. Then after that, it's a pretty big drop-off. Rashard Mendenhall, I don't like the Cardinals' backs, either one at this point. Andre Ellington's also kind of fallen off the map, so I don't like them moving forward. Now, LaShawn McCoy going up against the Giants. I like that matchup. I think you can keep rolling. He did have a tough week last week, only 18 carries for 55 yards and 6 catches for 26, but the Giants' defense, as we've seen, not exactly stellar this year, although they are getting kind of a bit of momentum because they did so well against Minnesota, but Philly's a different team. I think they're going to have to run based on the fact that their quarterback situation's a mess. So I think you want to keep rolling with LaShawn McCoy. You won't have Donald Brown this week. You won't have Ray Rice. You won't have Ben Tate. So after that, it's kind of a big drop-off. Okay, moving on to wideouts. A lot of noise at wide receiver. Number one receiver last week, who else? Calvin Johnson. I mean, come on. I mean, it's kind of suffice to say that any week that Calvin Johnson is not the number one fantasy receiver, it's a big shocker. But again, the sick catch that he made over those defenders, it was just stuff out of a movie. I mean, it was just great to watch. You're definitely still rolling with Calvin Johnson. He had 9 catches, 155 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week. Calvin Johnson, Vincent Jackson had a great week again last week. Again, he's going to be the only real strong weapon now in that Tampa offense with Doug Martin out. So you're keeping rolling with Vincent Jackson. A.J. Green is finally starting to get going. As long as Andy Dalton is hot, A.J. Green is going to be hot. So he had 21 points last week. Now, again, the only concern that I have with that, of course, is the Jets. Are they going to find a way to shut down Andy Dalton? But you can't sit A.J. Green. He's too good to sit. Your Denver guys, Eric Decker, Demaryius Thomas, you're definitely starting them against the Redskins. Harry Douglas of Atlanta, boy, has he certainly come on in Julio Jones' absence. And again, I said, everyone was freaking out. Oh, no Julio Jones. What's Atlanta going to do? Well, Harry Douglas has stepped in and taken on that top position. And he had a great week last week, caught all 7 of Matt Ryan's targets for 149 yards and a score, 20 fantasy points. Awesome week for Harry Douglas. Keep rolling with him against Arizona this week. I love the matchup. Borderline, maybe even solid, rock solid number 2 at the least for you this week. Love Harry Douglas going forward. And I mentioned this guy, and I missed out on him on waivers too, but the other guy you can really like moving forward is Jarrett Boykin from Green Bay. The Green Bay receiving core is a mess right now. Randall Cobb is banged up and maybe and out for a while. James Jones is banged up. Now Jermichael Finley is banged up. In fact, at some point he was even in the ICU with that neck injury. So who knows how long he's going to be out. So Jarrett Boykin gets his opportunity to shine, and I tell you what, he ran with it. 8 catches for 103 yards and a score for 16 fantasy points. And even if one of those guys come back, you don't think that Boykin's still going to have some relevance? Oh, yeah, I think he is. So I think you can definitely, if he's still out there, if in your league, if someone missed him on waivers, if your league's not as smart as mine, if someone didn't pick up on Jarrett Boykin, you can definitely put in for Jarrett Boykin. I think he's going to be at least a solid number 3 option going forward with the upside for more as long as he keeps getting involved in that Green Bay offense. And obviously going up against Minnesota this week, dream matchup for Jarrett Boykin and the Packers. Brandon Gibson in Miami is very fluky. I don't like Brandon Gibson. If I had a Miami receiver, I'd rather have obviously Mike Wallace or Brian Hartline, who I got off of waivers this week to be my number 3 guy because Keenan Allen is on a bye for me. Brandon Gibson's, yes, the helicopter touchdown was awesome. It was, SportsCenter top 10 play worthy. But for fantasy purposes, I'm not sold on him. He only caught 5 of his 8 targets from Ryan Tannehill for 40 yards with the 2 scores. Yes, that's 16 points. But again, what has Gibson done all year? Let's delve into the research files here on one Brandon Gibson. Gibson's fantasy numbers before that game. These were Gibson's fantasy points. 7, 1, 4, 7, and 7. That is what he is, a number 3 fantasy receiver at best. He is just very, very fluky. Those were his first touchdowns of the year. So, again, you can't really rely on that 1 week breakout, So just if you're desperate for like a number 3, number 4, or a flex play, maybe you take a shot on Brandon Gibson going up against New England this week. But again, I'd rather have Wallace or Brian Hartline this week. Jeremy Curley of the Jets. Look, as long as Santonio Holmes and Stephen Hill are out and they're not producing at the level, apparently Jeremy Curley is going to be Geno Smith's go-to guy. And certainly he put up great numbers last week, caught 8 catches for 97 yards in the score. Curley, I think, is a guy who can definitely plug in as a number 3 receiver for you. Again, I don't like the Cincinnati matchup this week, but it's not like their defense is anything stellar. So, again, Curley, a number 3 option for you this week. Excuse me. Long day. Speaking of fluky, same with Aldrick Robinson of Washington. Yes, he had 13 fantasy points last week, but again, he was only targeted twice in the game, 75 yards of the score. It's too fluky for me. I don't like him. Terrence Williams of Dallas, love this guy. He's clearly earned himself a starting spot in the offense, and I think he has on fantasy rosters. He had 6 catches for 71 yards last week with a score. Clearly, the team realizes that Miles frickin' Austin is not going to get over this hamstring issue or be relevant anytime soon. In fact, even when healthy, I don't think he's had a catch in weeks. Terrence Williams is clearly the starting option now there. The number 2 guy behind Des Bryant, or the number 3 really behind Des Bryant and Jason Witten. So, love Terrence Williams. You can definitely put him in your lineups for the Detroit game this week. Now, a couple guys to monitor moving forward that you could use potentially also as number 3 wide receivers, but they're on bye this week, so you can't use them. DeAndre Hopkins of Houston had 3 catches for 76 yards in the score last week. Now, again, Hopkins is kind of fluky because, again, Andre Johnson, the main weapon in Houston, number 1, but again, number 2, Houston now is using Case Keenum at quarterback. That's not exactly ideal, so, again, you really want to run out. But the guy that I like better than Hopkins moving forward is Darius Hayward-Bay. And I know that I've said on here before that Hayward-Bay is not worth the risk because he's got terrible hands. He's in Dropsville all the time. He's a speed freak, but he doesn't have the greatest of hands. Well, here's the thing. Opportunity knocks on the door for DHB because Reggie Wayne now, with that ACL being out for the year, he's gone. T.Y. Hilton obviously give me the top option. Him, Kobe Fleener gets value ranked up, but so does DHB because he's now going to have to be the number 2 guy. So, excuse me. He had a rush for 30 yards last week. But he also had 4 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown. So he had 13 fantasy points. So obviously you can't play him this week, but if you have a roster spot open to stash DHB moving forward, he's certainly going to get more looks. So right now he's no worse than a number 3 wide receiver because he's going to have to get the looks in Indy, and obviously with Andrew Luck as his quarterback, the sky's the limit. So DHB is a guy you want to monitor going forward. Steve Smith had a nice bounce-back week this week, past week. 5 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown for 12 points. Tampa Bay, again, is Darrelle Revis going to focus in on Steve Smith? Is he going to focus on Greg Olsen? We don't know for sure, but I don't love the matchup. But again, you probably can't afford to sit Steve Smith, so maybe keep rolling with him as a number 2, number 3. Eddie Royal came back surprisingly from a toe injury. Was not expected to come back this week, but he caught all 4 of his targets for 69 yards and a score. However, Royal's been very up and down at times this season. I'd still rather have Keenan Allen going forward, which I do. I still rather have him going forward, but he's on a bye this week, so don't make sure you have Eddie Royal reserved this week. Alshon Jeffrey of Chicago has really come on strong in recent weeks. 4 catches for 105 yards. Also had 2 rushes for 16 yards last week for 11 points. Again, the Bears, though, really did well against Washington. But again, you won't have him this week. He's on a bye. But in the future, going forward, Jeffrey's a strong number 2, number 3 play for you. Obviously, Des Bryant, you're rolling with him. He had 11 points last week. Marvin Jones of Cincinnati. It's nice to see that Andy Dalton is getting a second option behind A.J. Green. But the thing about it is, though, that Marvin Jones isn't targeted a whole lot. He only got targeted 6 times in the game, 4 catches for 57 yards. Yeah, he did have the touchdown, and I believe now it's back-to-back weeks that he's had touchdowns. But can you really rely on that going forward? That's really kind of the thing. again, if we do some research here and we look at his points, okay, I was right. He has had touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. He had a touchdown also week 3, so he has 3 touchdowns on the year. So 3 good games, 3 bad games. So a 50-50 guy. He was held out of Wednesday practice though with a shoulder injury. But so monitor that going forward. But maybe number again. I can only say number 3, number 4 guy. Tough matchup with the Jets. Sidney Rice of Seattle is really fluky, hit or miss. He had a touchdown last week, but again, not so sold on him. His numbers will go down, especially if Percy Harvin comes back. The thing about Seattle is their receivers haven't exactly been stellar this year. Golden Tate, Sidney Rice, Doug Baldwin, they've maybe had one big hits week by week, but they're not very consistent. The only consistent receiver in Seattle, I think, is going to be Percy Harvin, so that's just my take on that. Jordy Nelson had a good week last week. 5 catches, 42 yards, and a score. As long as he's healthy and moving strong, you're going to start him against Minnesota. Kendall Wright, again, I talked about the Tennessee receivers with Jake Locker making them better. Kendall Wright has really come on strong of late. He was targeted 12 times last week, had 9 catches for 98 yards. He could be a serviceable number 3 going forward, especially in PPR leagues. I really like Kendall Wright moving forward. Obviously, Wes Welker, you're starting him against Washington. Jaguar receivers, Cecil Shorts, Justin Blackman. They're going to get their share of garbage time work. Cecil Shorts was surprise active last week, but he had 8 catches for 80 yards. Blackman had 5 points last week. Obviously, I think these guys obviously Blackman you want to keep as a number 2 lock in your lineup, or even a borderline 1. Because they're going to get a lot of garbage time work against San Francisco, I think. Shorts is definitely a 2-3 play as well. Ruben Randall. I was fortunate to get Ruben Randall off of waivers because he is starting to look really strong as a definite number 3, even borderline number 2 play. He has touchdowns now in 3 straight weeks for the Giants. So that was certainly huge. He did lose a fumble this week, so he kept on a double-digit fantasy points, but he's had great success against the Eagles in the past. I like Ruben Randall this week. Keep rolling with him. Riley Cooper of Philly is an interesting name out there. He was targeted 6 times, or he caught 6 catches for 88 yards. He had 8 fantasy points. Didn't find the end zone, but whoever Philly's quarterback is going to be remains a mystery. But if they go back to Vic, who knows? Riley Cooper's kind of hit and miss, but again, it's the Giants. It's their defense. They haven't been that good. So, maybe again a plug and play bye week filler number 3, number 4 for you this week for Riley Cooper. And again, Mike Wallace this week is a good option for you going up against New England. I like him. Anquan Bolden, you're rolling with him against Jacksonville. Let's see, and after that, again, it kind of drops off. You don't have Torrey Smith. You don't have Keenan Allen this week, so keep them reserved. Dwayne Bowe has really been frustrating this year. Now, thankfully, Alex Smith is starting to look more his way. He had 9 targets. He caught 5 of them for 66 yards. But again, that's only number 3 receiver numbers. If you look at Dwayne Bowe this season, in his fantasy stats this year, 3, 11, 11, so 2 back-to-back good weeks. But in the last 3 weeks, 3, 4, and 6. So not exactly stellar weeks. So again, more of a number 3. The Cleveland matchup's nice this week, but again, who's Joe Hayden going to be focusing on? Oh, gee, he'll probably be on Dwayne Bowe. So don't like that matchup. Steve Johnson of Buffalo, yeah, he was targeted 13 times last week, but only 6 catches for 61 yards. Don't love him this week. And after that, again, some big drop-offs. Pierre Garçon, you want to keep rolling with him, though, against Denver, because that'll probably be a shootout, but not really great on him. And after that, there's guys that you just wouldn't touch. So after that, pretty big drop-off. Okay, moving on now to the tight end position. And Where did Jordan Reed come from? I mean, wow. He was your top tight end last week. Not Jimmy Graham, not Gronk, not even Jordan Cameron. No, Jordan Reed, a different Jordan, was the number one last week. Jordan Reed of Washington, 19 fantasy points last week. 9 catches, caught all 9 targets for 134 yards and a touchdown. That's what you want out of a strong fantasy tight end. And if Jordan Reed, by chance, is still out there in your league and you don't have a solid number 1 tight end, he could be a guy you could plug in now right away and be a successful player. Going up against Denver this week in what could be a shootout game, I really like Jordan Reed moving forward. If he's out there in your league, I think you can definitely take a chance on Jordan Reed and get some really good returns from him. Really like him moving forward. Now, Jermichael Finley did have a good week this week, but again, the neck injury, he was in the ICU briefly. His status is really up and down in the air going forward. So again, Coach McCarthy said today that he's doing better every single day. He's making progress. But again, there's still a chance he could go on IR this week. You want to monitor Jermichael Finley moving forward. He did have 13 fantasy points last week, but again, just monitor him. I mentioned Delanie Walker. He had a touchdown last week. He had 3 catches for 52 yards and a score. He's starting to get that good rapport going with Jake Locker in Tennessee. But again, he's on bye this week, so you're not going to have his services this week. Rob Gronkowski is finally back. I'm sure several fantasy owners are very happy about that. He was targeted 17 times last week by Tom Brady. 8 catches for 114 yards. He didn't find the end zone, but 11 points in his debut. That's the Gronk you want to expect. You want to get Gronk back in your lineups immediately. Jordan Cameron, 7 catches, 55 yards and a score, 11 points last week. Again, obviously the tough matchup with Kansas City this week. And oh yeah, now their quarterback is Jason Campbell. They're not going with Brandon Weeden. Brandon Weeden is benched again for like the umpteenth time this season. Now the Cleveland Browns quarterback jersey has to add a 20th name to it because now Jason Campbell is starting. Seriously, if you have not looked up Cleveland Browns quarterback jersey in Google Images, you need to, because it is the funniest thing that I've ever seen. I mean, I know Cleveland fans have gone through a lot of pain, but I tell you what, it's just funny to see. It starts with Tim Couch. This is all the quarterbacks since '99. It goes Tim Couch, and then it goes guys, like I think Spurgeon Wynn was on that list, and of course Brian Hoyer, and who else was on that dreaded list? Obviously, Charlie Fry and Derek Anderson and all these guys. I can't remember the whole list, but it's on Google Images. Just Google it. Cleveland Browns quarterback jersey. Don't be disappointed. Jason Campbell starting this week. He's the 20th different Cleveland quarterback since '99. Who knows what to expect out of guys like Jordan Cameron and Josh Gordon. So obviously their value takes a little bit of a hit, but you probably don't have better options out there to start, so you want to keep rolling with these 2 guys. They're pretty much Cleveland's offense. Obviously, keep rolling with Julius Thomas of Denver, going up against Washington this week. He had 10 points last week. Tyler Eifert of Cincinnati found the end zone last week. Look, as long as Andy Dalton is hot, he's going to get these receivers involved. Tyler Eifert had a good week this week, so 3 catches, 45 yards of that score. Maybe a number 2 player, a guy you plug in for a bye week filler. If you don't have Kobe Fleener, if you don't have the tight end in Houston, Garrett Graham, or if you don't have, Martellus Bennett, maybe a guy like Tyler Eifert you can plug in as well. Same with Zach Miller of Seattle. I see him more as a plug-and-play guy. He was targeted 7 times last week, 5 catches for 40 yards and a score. But with the Rams coming the matchup this week, really like Zach Miller this week. So you don't have Kobe Fleener. You don't have Dallas Clark. Keep them benched. And after that, again, a pretty big drop-off, although obviously you're starting Vernon Davis against Jacksonville. Now, Vernon Davis only had 6 fantasy points last week, 4 catches, 62 yards, but he was targeted 8 times. He's still a strong weapon in Colin Kaepernick's offense, so you want to keep rolling with him against Jacksonville. After that, again, big drop-off. Kellen Davis, Jermaine Gresham, Brandon Pettigrew. These are hit-and-miss guys. Heath Miller. Heath Miller's been a big-time disappointment. Yeah, he had a touchdown last week, but he also lost a fumble. He only got targeted 4 times. He's been a real hit or miss. Rob Hausler. Jason Witten, kind of a disappointing week last week, though. Only 4 catches for 48 yards. Not so sold on him, although we might not be able to afford to bench him. Jeff Cumberland to the Jets. Greg Olsen to Carolina. He caught all 4 of his targets, but unless Olsen finds the end zone, he's not service-worthy. Won't have Antonio Gates this week. Jared Cook now can be dropped in the majority of leagues. Won't have Garrett Graham. Tony Gonzalez only had 2 catches for 30 yards this week. But again, a lot of teams now are focusing on Gonzalez because Julio Jones is out, hence the big week for Harry Douglas. So, again, you probably can't afford to bench Gonzalez, so you want to keep rolling with him against Arizona. And, oh, yeah, Kyle Rudolph had another awful week with Josh Freeman as his quarterback. He was targeted 9 times, but only caught 3 of them for 27 yards and did not find the end zone. Kyle Rudolph is hair puller extreme. I don't trust him. All right, real quick, as we always do, to close the show, rapid fire here with some kickers and defenses to suggest this week with good matchups. If you're looking for some options, if your kicker or D is on a bye this week or looking for some plug-and plays. Kickers this week, Graham Geno of Carolina, as I said. I love the matchup going up against winless Tampa this week. He had 14 points last week. I really like him as a plug-and-play. Sean Swisham of Pittsburgh. He's perfect on this. He was perfect last week. Like him going up against Oakland. Obviously, Stephen Hauschka of Seattle going up against the Rams. That's a dream matchup. He was perfect last week with 12 fantasy points, so I like him this week. Matt Prater of Denver, obviously. Great matchup this week against Washington. Well, they might like Kai Forbath, too, of Washington going up against Denver because that's going to be a shootout. Mason Crosby of Green Bay. Keep rolling with him against Minnesota. And obviously Phil Dawson of San Francisco going up against Jacksonville. Great kicker matchups there. And then some DSTs. Panthers D was the top D last week with 20 fantasy points. They're going to keep it rolling this week against Tampa Bay. Obviously, the 49ers D this week is a must-start going up against Jacksonville. The Seahawks D is a must-start going up against St. Louis. You could probably get away with using the Giants D against Philly because, again, Philly's offense kind of banged up, so not a whole lot of great options there. So maybe you can get with them as a streaming defense this week. Packers D against Minnesota is obviously a must-start option. Chiefs D against Cleveland is obviously a must-start option. Falcons D against Arizona, probably a plug-and-play or number 2, not great there. Eagles D going up against the Giants, decent number 2 option, I think, because remember the Giants are trying to gain a little more confidence in themselves. Steelers D going up against Oakland, Terrell Pryor doing as well as he is, it's kind of a questionable play. But what I really like this week I picked up off waivers is the Saints D going up against Buffalo. Again, they've had a week to prepare for Thad Lewis. Great matchup for them this week. And, of course, the Bengals D going up against the Jets. They should bounce back after a bad week last week. All right, guys. That's all we got for this week here on the FFSR. Hopefully injuries did not affect your team too much. Again, I got pretty fortunate last week that it didn't affect mine, although I did lose, but I lost to a very good team with a lot of talent. So just keep that in mind moving forward. Just make sure that you know who's out there on waiver, you know what your injury situation is, you know who the guys are that are going to impact things every single week. So again, feel free to like the video. If you really like what you watch, subscribe. Again, feel free to leave any comments or questions either on the video down below or on my channel. I will try to get to as many as I can to help you before the games start. So again, as the weeks go on in the season, we're just trying to either make that playoff push or hopefully focus on the playoffs, or if we're struggling, just trying to get good guys off waivers to help us moving forward. So good luck this week, and we'll see you all again next week for another edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Thanks, guys. Good luck, and God bless.